Hello, and welcome all to this first church chat over the rainbow. Before we begin, I would like to read a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territories we reside on, and a way of honoring the Indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the long existing history that has brought us to reside on the land and to seek to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. In this extended episode, we will have conversations with library professionals, musicians, and researchers about projects and collections focused on the LGBTQ+ community in honor of Pride Month. This chat will be split into 2 sessions with a 10-minute intermission. In part 1, we will discuss LGBTQ+ initiatives at organizations and institutions. In part 2, we will have conversations with professionals in the industry about their work, projects, and experiences related to LGBTQ+ topics and issues. We invite attendees to ask questions throughout the event using the Q&A feature next to the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to ask a question live, please let us know in the Q&A so that we can unmute you. We cannot guarantee that we will be able to answer all the questions live, but we will certainly do our best to address them. If a question is posted in the chat, there is a chance we may not see it, so please use the Q&A feature. To kick off our first session, I invite our moderators and panelists to briefly introduce themselves to our audience. We will begin with Jaimi Parker.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. I just put together a short little presentation for you. So, all right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jaimi Parker. I'm the exhibits coordinator at UNT Special Collections. One of our largest archival collecting areas is the LGBTQ archive, which features primary resources such as photographs, newspapers, organizational records, ephemera like flyers and ticket stubs, t-shirts, buttons, and so much more. So I put together a little slideshow to kind of give you all an idea of what we have. The majority of the materials in the LGBTQ archive are from the late 1960s to present day, though there are materials that are older than that. And they mostly represent the North Texas region, with a focus on Dallas, though some materials feature other parts of Texas and the US. This archive was established in 2012, and from very early on, we developed a partnership with a community-based organization working to collect Dallas LGBTQ history called the Dallas Way. This partnership is based on the Dallas Way helping to collect and curate collections that come to UNT Special Collections, as well as them working to fundraise for us to digitize all of the collections they bring in. So this partnership allows both of our organizations to really focus on what we do most effectively, while also creating additional outreach opportunities. So one of our main efforts is trying to share these materials as widely as we can with both local communities that are represented in the history, as well as with researchers studying LGBTQ history and culture. We're particularly interested in making sure that Southern and Southwestern LGBTQ culture is not left out of these larger conversations, which can so easily focus on larger coastal LGBTQ communities. So one of the main ways we're trying to make these materials easily accessible is through our digitization efforts. And of course, the Dallas Way has helped us raise money to fund the digitization of the collections they bring in. And we've also digitized selections from some of the other collections in the LGBTQ archive as well. So as part of this process, we make a great effort to add as much relevant metadata and keywords as we can to each individual item, so that everything is easily searchable within the portal to Texas history. And you should have a link shared in the chat. We currently have nearly 13,000 individual items from the LGBTQ archive available online right now. So in addition to having materials available online, we have also had a large number of academic researchers utilize the LGBTQ archive over the years. Many of them won our research fellowship, which helps pay for their travel costs and for the time they spend researching with us. Some of the topics that our researchers have looked into include the history of conversion therapy, anti-sodomy laws, legal cases, sexuality, HIV/AIDS, and the AIDS memorial quilt, to name a few. We're always excited to have people come and really do a deep dive into these topics. But with that said, we also support non-academic researchers and students who are just interested in learning some of the history or looking back at their friends and family who are represented in the archive. We're always happy to help with research, even if researchers cannot come to look at materials themselves. We offer proxy research services and we'll scan materials that are not already available online. We also have been making a great effort to connect the collections with the community by creating exhibits. The great thing about creating exhibits from our materials is that it's more accessible to the average person than looking at random photographs or documents out of context. Putting these materials into context to tell a story makes the individual items more meaningful, and utilizing these primary source materials to tell the story also makes that story more meaningful. Sharing exhibits also helps us to demonstrate that these types of materials are important to keep and share because they help represent such wonderful history that would be lost otherwise. Some of the work we have done with exhibits includes hosting 2 exhibits on campus, utilizing the LGBTQ archive with a focus on general history of the community and as well as the AIDS memorial quilt, which you can see here on the slide. And each of these has a digital exhibit counterpart available on our website. Links should be shared in the chat for you. We've also created 3 large exhibits to display at Dallas City Hall for Pride Month from 2017 to 2019. We have shared exhibits with the Dallas Public Library Archives, the Oak Lawn Public Library, and we've provided pop-up exhibits for local LGBTQ community events, as well as local companies celebrating Pride Month. It has been really wonderful to share this history in a way that validates so many people's personal experiences. And it's also been great to witness people seeing their own history on display, especially at the Dallas City Hall exhibit receptions. I heard so many people point out their old friends in photographs or mention that they were at a specific event that was highlighted in the display, or that they have the same items or similar items at home that they should really get around to donating. So these types of comments really show us that this type of outreach work is just as important as the actual collection and preservation of these materials. So we want to continue doing this work and connect to the community as we go on in the future. So with that said, if anyone is interested in working with us, we're always excited to share the LGBTQ archive. So you can reach out to us to do community events, or if you're interested in researching, at the emails here. So I'll pass it along to our next presenter.
Thank you, Jaimi. I'm going to hand things over to our moderator, Adam Spata, to continue with the session. Take it away, Adam.
Thank you very much, Sabina. This first portion of our Over the Rainbow First Chair chat focuses on advocacy and representation in various organizations. Thank you, Jaimi, for that excellent presentation. It was a really great kickoff to how representation advocacy can be done so well in the context of the University of North Texas. I'll be talking a little bit about the work that I have done with Matthew Velilla. I'm sorry, Matthew, I stumbled over your name. I've been up late last night finishing our LGBTQ plus music resources LibGuide, but I'll get to that in just a moment. Right now, I'd like to invite some of our other panelists in this session to discuss some of their work. We sent out some guiding questions that we can go over. But if you just want to talk about your roles, we can, how you work in your own parts of your institutions, either at UNT or elsewhere. We can start with Coby Condrey, if you like. So Coby, do you want to give us a spiel or anything like that?
Sure, I'll start.
Wonderful, thank you.
So my name's Coby Condrey. I am the Collection Development Liaison Librarian for UNT Libraries. That is a role that affords me the ability to purchase materials for the collections. I have a number of different roles. One is to act as a liaison to the liaisons, our subject librarians, and that allowed me to work with Julie Lusinger, who is our subject librarian for women and gender studies. And the LGBTQ topic falls within that area. And Julie was reviewing some literature, and she found that the trans community in general does not go to the library to find information. And she was disturbed by this. She was like, why is the trans community not coming to the library? Why do they seek each other for information that might be better found in a library where, particularly an academic library, where this information would be presumably vetted in some way and possibly a little more reliable than word of mouth experiences. So she asked me if I would partner with her on a grant initiative that the library does called the Dean's Innovation Grant. And we wrote one and we're awarded it. And the idea is that we would beef up our collection that appeals specifically to the trans community. So I'm going to switch over to my notes so I don't miss anything. We wanted to not only beef up our collection, but we wanted to make it more visible. We wanted the trans community to not only know that it was there, but to use it. So Julie did kind of a deep dive in our monograph discovery tool, found a large number of titles that could potentially appeal to a trans person. We then asked some trans faculty and some trans friendly faculty to review those. We gave them surveys and asked them about, what is your interest level in this particular title? And we got that feedback. We also asked our assessment librarian to assess the collection that we had. And we were able to make some selections. The grant gave us about $3,000 to buy books, but we also have a program here at UNT where we can put discovery records in the catalog for titles that we don't own yet. It's called demand-driven or patron-driven acquisitions. It's invisible to the patron. You don't know that we don't own the book. We get to use it up to a certain point and we pay a rental on it. And then after it's used a certain number of times, it's triggered for purchase. So we ended up getting about 35 books that were specifically purchased, and then about 25 to 30 books that were in our DDA program. And I think in our intermission, you'll see some book covers for the kinds of materials that we selected. One of the things I found most interesting was in the survey results, we found things like memoirs were not very appealing titles. People were not so interested in memoirs of the trans experience, but they were interested in medical information, things like changing your voice register or dealing with the issues of hormonal treatment and therapies. So those books were, of high interest, and those are the ones that we prioritized. I think Julie came up with a list of maybe 150 books, which we couldn't afford to buy all. So we did end up buying about 35 and putting another 25 in the DDA program. We do have plans to assess the use of the collection at some point in the future. Right now, we're in the promotional stage. So we recently got a desk card kind of talking about the collection that we put at the service points within the UNT libraries, and we're also providing it to what we would call strategic points on campus, like the Pride office or the multiculturalism office, anywhere that we think that, maybe a trans person might just happen to show up and not know that there are library materials that address kind of pressing questions that might be unique to that population. I think that's all I have for now. I'm happy to answer questions. I can pull up a list of titles and kind of tell you the kinds of things that we ended up buying. But I do know at some point, Julie and I will go back and ask our assessment librarian to look at, which DDA titles were used, which ones were actually triggered. And then we can also assess how much usage we got out of the books that we did purchase. One thing I failed to mention, and I should have said this kind of much earlier, because transitioning can sometimes be a very private matter, we felt like it might be not so great to buy a bunch of print books where someone has to either come into the library to get them themselves, or maybe even ask at a service desk about where would I find these books. So we did prefer to get ebooks. That allows people to check them out from the comfort of their homes, as long as they have their EU ID and password. We did want a fresh collection, so we kind of went within the last 5 to 10 years. We limited it to the English language. I don't remember exactly why. Probably there wasn't a whole lot in other languages to get. And then our collection development policy is that we only purchase materials in languages that are taught at the university. We did exclude juvenile titles and young adult fiction, that kind of stuff, because we were trying to appeal to the actual audience here on the campus. And we did cross-check our catalog just to make sure that we weren't duplicating things. We were buying new materials that were not already represented. So that's all I have for now, and open to questions or comments about the future of the, it's called the Trans Accessible Libraries Initiative. So thank you.
Thanks, Coby. That was a really excellent and insightful look into how acquisitions can play a role in advocacy. And I think you addressed that question that I brought up for our panelists extremely well. If anyone, as Coby said, if anyone has questions, please feel free to raise them. You can put them in the chat. You can feel free to type them if you would like us to address them there.
Actually, I also see that
yeah, please go ahead.
One of the things Julie did as part of her promotion was she created a guide, and it is a very extensive one. There is actually a tab on it that talks about if you're a librarian and want to develop a collection for a trans population. She kind of recounts what we did and gives people leads on, many issues in contemporary society are developing faster than the subject, terms are available to cover them. So she gives you some ideas about, like, you might need to, even though the term itself is not the right one, you might need to use an older term in order to find the full breadth of the topic. So I suggest just looking at that guide. It's a really extensive one, talking about the resources of the UNT libraries and different aspects of, ebooks versus other kinds of materials or different kinds of audience appeal. I see there's a question. So building questions are way beyond my area of knowledge. Now, we are a welcoming building, and I know that we have recently done some initiatives to convert some restrooms into all gender restrooms. But as far as space allocations, I don't know how to answer those questions. It's all stuff outside of my area. I just buy the books. Someone else gets to decide where they're going to live or what kind of advertisement might be available to make you aware of an ebook. That's all kind of stuff I'm not that aware of. If your building is welcoming or becomes more welcoming and inclusive, do you think that I would alter our digital versus print collection strategy? I don't think we would. Personally, we did discuss this a number of times, and the sentiment from my side and from Julie's side was that it's just going to be much more appealing to a person who is transitioning, is trans in some way, or a person who knows someone who is trans and wants to know more about it. It's kind of like the, I might want to know more about, let's say, a former president, but I don't want to go to the library and check out that book because I don't want to show the circulation desk that I'm reading about that person. So I'd much rather read it online from the comfort of my home in the privacy where no one really gets to know that I'm looking up, information on someone that you don't know why I'm interested in it. I might be an aficionado, I might be an enemy, but we just kind of felt it was better to provide an ebook collection, and I don't think we would duplicate that in print. Our overall collection development policy for the university libraries is to prefer an ebook if it is at all available and the price is, not prohibitively different from the print. So I think our guideline right now is, if the ebook is within $500 of the cost of the print, we're going to get the ebook.
Hey, Coby, I got a question for you.
Yes.
What has been the initial response to this Trans Accessible Libraries initiative? And in that initial response, have y'all learned anything that maybe y'all hadn't thought of initially on the onset of things and adjusted from any initial input?
I personally haven't received any input at this point. Julie may have. Julie's the, so in librarianship, there's kind of public services, and then there's technical services, or what it used to be called as technical services, the people behind the scenes, and I'm the behind the scenes person. So Julie may have gotten feedback that I just haven't heard about yet. I know that we just now got the kind of advertisement card out. So even though the books entered the collection in the late fall, I have not heard any response yet, and I don't think there's been very much time to promote the collection at this point. Now, we have consulted with some strategic partners. Kathleen Hobson in the Pride office has been a good advisor to us on wording, on placement of materials, that kind of stuff. We've also worked with Clark Pomelo, a professor in the Department of History. He has also provided some feedback on the project as we've developed it. And then we also consulted with Jake Mangum, who is a librarian in the External Relations Department. So those are kind of people that we knew could provide us good information about how to make the project go forward. But I haven't received any feedback at this point, and I think Julie would have told me if she did, and I don't remember her telling me about any feedback at this point. I think we're still kind of in the okay, we've built it, now let's tell people it exists and see what comes out of that. let's see, another question. Someone responding.
Yeah, sorry, that was me. But
Yeah, that's cool.
actually, yeah, I was just thinking of that. The stuff I had written in there was actually just concerning some of the bathroom stuff, because that's the biggest thing I've seen space-wise. And if I were to give thoughts as a trans person myself, I know the prioritizing of ebooks is definitely clever in the sense of anyone who's in a position where they're marked visibly trans, it can be a wee bit distressing to hang out in public spaces, depending on where you are. I know that was my experience. But one thing I was wondering, Coby, is I've been thinking a lot lately about the ways in which search algorithms in particular work and how people can find resources that they maybe don't necessarily know the words of what to search for.
Right.
Within this initiative, especially with the prioritizing of ebooks, has there been any sort of special ways you've been putting together online catalogs to make these a bit like, make these maybe easier to find if folks maybe don't know certain keywords or anything to that effect?
So that's a good question, and it does touch on something that we did identify, and I would have to go look the exact examples up, but there were some, so the Library of Congress creates the master list of subject headings, but you are not, no library is obligated to use them, you know, and they can choose to create their own and put them in their local catalog. And we have actually done that. And then libraries can also go to the Library of Congress, you know, governor of this issue and say, hey, we should change this nomenclature, or we should change the subject heading. And there are ways to change it. It's just, it's bureaucratic and slow. So I like the one example that comes to me that has been a very recent development is basically we took the subject term illegal alien out of the catalog because we don't believe those terms are appropriate any longer. We changed it to undocumented workers, which is more accurate as to what it's describing. But that is a local cataloging decision. We decided to do that within our local catalog. That is a decision that is still being debated in the higher levels of the Library of Congress, how to fix it. So yes, there were actually some terms, and I'm just itching to hit my keyboard and go, okay, now what was that? We did find some terms that was like, okay, this book really, and I may be wrong, but I think it may be, we found some books that the topic was not transvestism, but the subject was transvestism. And we actually went to cataloging and said, you know, there's a better term for what is happening in this book. Let's change it. It's not about cross-dressing. It's about something else. It's about a person who is a trans person. So let's use the more up-to-date. Now, they were much older books. You know, as librarians, we use the terminology that is handed to us at the time. And then, you know, we've got what? Over 2 million books in the catalog, and sometimes it gets a little hard to keep track of how language changes and what needs to be updated. But I think your question is a very cogent one with regard to where society is debating and discussing and changing the way it deals with the matter. The library world is sometimes struggling to catch up, and we can do it on a local level, but on the big picture level, it's a little slower. And once my turn is over, if I find that term in my email, I will pop it into the chat.
We're getting a lot of great questions in chat, and I really appreciate this. We have several more panelists to go in this panel. So I would love to get to them if we can. So those of you who have questions for Coby, I'm sure Coby would love to answer them later on, maybe through email or discussion, maybe during the intermission later. I will take, since I and Matthew are next in the lineup, as Sabito pointed out earlier, we will take this time briefly to discuss our work on the very newly published, as of the wee small hours of the morning last night, the LGBTQ plus music resources LibGuide, and I will share that link in the chat right now. And I will attempt to share my screen, but I'm terrible at this. Let me see. All right, this is the new LGBTQ plus music resources at the University of North Texas. I've been working with Matthew, who has expressed great passion and interest in putting together this LibGuide with me. When you come to this homepage, you'll see our welcome, and under scholarly resources, we have articles, books, and blogs, various databases, and information on performance organizations and scholarly organizations. We have URLs and hyperlinks, which may not be fuzzy for you. They're fuzzy for me as I try them here at UNT. And the articles have DOIs associated with them. The books have call numbers in our UNT catalog, so you can have ease of access. And I would like to say that this is, as I mentioned before, a very new guide, and it is in its nascent stages, and we welcome your input, critiques, and criticisms as to how this guide can grow, evolve, and benefit not just the LGBTQ plus community, but allies as well, and exploring resources regarding this community. And I will turn it over now to Matthew to discuss his work in developing his list of printed music in this guide. So Matthew, take it away.
Hi, my name is Matthew Velilla. I'm an upcoming sophomore at UNT. I'm a tuba performance and music education major. So when it comes to the work, to listing all the names, we used a bunch of different resources trying to find as many LGBTQ composers and compile them into one list. From that list, we cut it down to what we have in the collection, which is in the Music in UNT library. So you can see that we have a bunch of names and pieces that we have in the collection. This is only some composer. All of them have one example of what piece we have, but we have a bunch more. We're also working on adding even more pieces and documents from different composers that aren't on this list already. So we have a separate list on that. This is just what we have in the collection so far, but we're working on developing it even more.
Thanks, Matthew. Would anyone like to ask any questions? I will stop the shares so I can see the rest of the Zoom screen.
Hey, Matthew, what kind of resources are being utilized to cross-reference people's identities or understanding, like what public resources, things that are self-identified from those composers? I know the Institute for Composer Diversity has had some stops and starts of success in this regard, and some public failings that I think a lot of people have learned from, and they're on a better track for those sort of things. But what's y'all's methodology of understanding composers' identities in that regard?
So one of the biggest resources that I actually used was the Lee Hartman band LGBTQ plus band composers project. And it's a giant list where they actually contacted certain composers that wanted to be added to the list that were part of the LGBTQ plus, or that they thought, oh, what? He's in the chat. That's so cool. I didn't know that. So yeah, we used that list, and I'm sorry, I just got so like distracted by that for a second. That's so cool. Yeah, we used that list, and I made sure that, they were a reliable source, that they asked people, that they did their research as well. I also went through all the names and I, look for stories about, each composer's past, like, if they had any gay affairs or any, reliable research. But one of the biggest resources that we actually used was the Lee Hartman LGBTQ plus Band Composers Association. Does anybody else have any other questions? I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry. I'm so new to this. Okay.
No one else has any questions. I'm just going to congratulate y'all on an excellent start, and I'm hoping to see this as like a very useful resource for both our college and the libraries and others going forward.
Thank you very much, Christopher. And this, it's a really good transition from what Coby was talking about with creating access to resources and information into what Matthew and I have been doing over the past month or so. So we will move on now, since Christopher was just asking that wonderful question, to Christopher's work.
Well, I'm going to be very upfront and say that my work is not mine alone. I'm happy to share the sort of things that we are doing in the College of Music. But I want to be very clear that this is a group effort, and I could not do anything alone in this regard, and I'm very happy to be a part of this team, as it were. I'm going to drop both the link of this into the chat. Here we go. I'm going to briefly share my screen. So who am I? I am Christopher Walker. I've been a part of the College of Music now, either as a student, an alumnus, or staff member for the past 12 years. My undergrad is in music composition, and for the last 6 years, I've been an administrative specialist and now administrative coordinator, at one time serving my home division within music composition as well as music education. But for the last 5 years, I've been the admin coordinator for jazz studies, in which I will remain for the next 2 months before we unfortunately leave because my spouse has a great opportunity. I also have been, for the last 2 years, a co-chair of our newly reconstituted Advisory Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This was a council that was a part of the college's bylaws for a great number of years, but it had been completely dormant until the last 2 years, in which Dean Richmond reconstituted it and garnered self-nominations and a selection process for our body, and we have just completely ran with it ever since, and it has been an excellent both source of evaluating the college's programs, people's practices, and policies, but also making not just an evaluation and discussion thereof, but really making actionable recommendations and reform and ways in which the college itself can be a more inclusive space, a more inclusive institution of research and scholarly output and performative output and everything else in that regard. You can see we're very, so it sometimes feels a little off to toot your horn, as it were, but we do keep a list of ongoing activities and what we consider accomplishments so that people can see the visibility of this sort of work, as well as we have a section here about an excellent program that was initiated by the council last year called About Belonging, which garnered a lot of feedback of both current community members and past alumni to give us a sense of in what ways people felt like they belonged within our halls and within our classrooms and spaces, and in what ways they did not, and what we can learn and glean from that. And I'm really excited to see that program continue into the future. The one thing I think I really want to talk about right now pertaining to this session, this webinar, and everything else stems from this accomplishment out of last December. Council members Carl Mitchell Galarza and Dr. David Bard Schwartz put together an advisory memo on data collection of gender and sexual identities and orientation. This is a piece of demographic identities that are not readily known in both the college and university, and is just kind of starting to be fully reconciled with university programs at large. I'm gonna unshare my screen real quick. There we go. And so this recommendation was made. We had a good discussion with Dean Richmond about it. Dean Richmond carried this recommendation on up through the Council of Deans and on through the cabinet, and it received a positive response and go ahead from the cabinet on the way back down. And I'm incredibly pleased to report that this has initiated a working group amongst the College of Music, the Council on the Advisory Council on Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and a number of assorted vice presidents and assistant vice presidents related to data management, enrollment management, collection, and everything else. And we're not yet, we're in very much a fact-finding mode at the moment. It is very much trying to get an understanding of what we're doing now, what other universities are doing, what we would consider peer institutions and things like that, understanding if there's any best practices we can readily adopt from the get-go. But where we hope this is heading, and the indications we kind of have now, is that the College of Music will be used as a test case and a test environment to enhance our collection of demographics regarding gender and sexual identity and sexual orientation of our students, of our staff, whether that be through the admissions process, through our onboarding process, and offboarding and everything else. Because I can just get on like a whole tangent of all this, but it's a particularly unique challenge because we face a lot of interesting hurdles. You know, Coby was kind of indicating there about for transitioning students, for trans students, there's the privacy components in this. There's certainly a bevy of privacy components when it comes to any amount of demographic data collection. So working through the nuance of how data is presented in the aggregate, who has the very extreme privileged, vetted, and trained access to individual data and things like that, and whatnot, and making sure that there's security in that regard. There's the nuance of course, for students in college, particularly undergraduate students, these are very formative years for everybody, and somebody may enter the college and university environment identifying one way, and they may leave identifying another way. So how do you accurately collect data at both the onset of bringing somebody into the university, and also provide opportunity for that data to be accurately reflected throughout their time here, and then once they have left the university as well. But then also you have things where perhaps a student is not fully out to their families, or their friends, or their immediate community, and you're asking these questions in maybe an admissions environment, whatnot, and they might not be comfortable with that and with the place that they're in and doing so. So it's all of these different considerations of how to procedurally go about this in a responsible manner, in a manner that is communicated clearly to our existing constituents and our future community members and everything else, and then using this data for good to understand who we are as a body better, because we can guess, we can try to maybe tack on census data towards like an overlay of who we are as a campus, but until you measure, you don't necessarily know. And so that's like a of the many cool things I think the council is up to at the moment. That's one of the things that I'm most excited about in this regard.
Thank you, Christopher. UNT have been experiencing some internet issues here, but anyone else, or even folks here at UNT? Am I frozen?
Small little delay.
You're a little spotty. Which typing something in the chat, but I don't know if I'll accidentally overcome it with other folks coming in. But I did
Miles,
want to.
I'll note something really quickly. You're talking about some things regarding bathrooms and whatnot. There is a possibility that there might be an opportunity for one of those things to happen within the building over the next year and a half. We'll see.
Yeah, I've been getting some news forwarded to me on that. I've also been quietly making noise at my alma mater about that privately too, just to highlight. One of the points I try to make to folks is that having one gender neutral bathroom on the far and most obscure part of the building is not the same as having them in regularly accessible parts.
Absolutely not.
So it's one of those, which is always fun. That's more of my alma mater's kind of issue, but no, I enjoy that. I was actually going to mention a lot of what you brought up aligned with a lot of the times I've done stuff like privately interviewing fellow trans musicians who are students, especially with concerns of privacy. And I know that I've sometimes felt with like anonymity that if I wanted to address concerns that are trans related in UNT, someone who's I'm like the most vocally like trans advocacy person probably in the school. So it probably only takes 3 guesses to figure out if I was involved. So I know there's always this interesting challenge with, let's just say, confidentiality versus anonymity when you do anything with the trans community. So I definitely appreciate when they get like these broader sort of numbers and ways that it's like, it can always feel weird having people's voices being abstracted, but it can be very useful when folks actually do want to maintain anonymity and safety. So
Yeah.
There's something to this. Oh, I'm sorry, Adam.
Sorry, we do have a limited amount of time.
Oh, yes,
and
yes.
apparently a limited amount of bandwidth as well. So I would like to get to Lisa Cooper and get her perspective on all of this as well, coming from a different perspective as
So Adam just froze for me. And so it's because we can't really predict the internet, I'm gonna go ahead and start. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Lisa.
No, thank you. I really appreciate this. And I just need to start by saying how really honored and excited I am to have been invited to be a part of this group and to thank Adam for inviting me. And I also want all of you guys to know that I consider myself an ally in training, and especially within the company that I see on my computer screen, I am very much so a novice, and I tend to mess up more often than I wish I did, but I'm working on it. So I wanted to share a few thoughts, share a thing with you guys, but before I do that, I'm gonna really quickly, let me do a screen share. Share screen, and I am going to give a shout out to my colleagues who did a project that I hope someday other people can adopt. One of my team members, Cece Chapman, collaborated with our colleague Charlie Tulane to figure out how many women film composers, film directors we have in our film collection, and they created a whole methodology for it, and they have everything they created in this article. I'm going to drop that link in the chat. And then if you go all the way to the bottom of the article, you'll find their links to their documentation in GitHub. In theory, this is something you all can recreate with your own collections. And someday I would love to do it with our music scores and for different populations and identities within our collections, but wanted to give that a shout out. Okay, and also I just find my face and my voice is super boring, so I'm going to give you all a presentation. So I'll still be talking, you'll have to deal with my very monotonous voice, but at least you'll have something more interesting to look at. So Adam invited me to participate, and I really had to scratch my head to figure out what can I possibly contribute that you guys haven't all already figured out. Because I am a little bit behind, I feel like, on this topic. And then eventually, after thinking on this for way too long, I was like, you know what, let's just talk about the thing that led Adam to reach out to me in the first place, which was related to some work I had been doing for an online course. So I'll get into that in just a minute, but this is what we're going to share. I'm going to share some thought exercises. These are things that used to be course assignments that I have since turned into thought exercises that I use for myself, just to try and keep myself accountable and self-aware, to be sure I'm practicing inclusive collection development practices. All right, but first, for those who I've not gotten to meet yet, my name is Lisa, she, her. I'm head of media services at Tulane University down in New Orleans. I'd be really happy to continue conversing on this topic, or sort of any other topic, frankly, through email, lhooper1@tulane.edu, or in Twitter, we could connect there. My handle is LKH Librarian. That is a work from home picture of me and Pancha. That is my dog, she's adorable. Okay, so let me set this up for you all. I think it was only just this spring, although it feels like forever ago, I had just a really wonderful opportunity to teach a 4-week online course, Introduction to Music Collection Development. And so I wanted to create weekly assignments that required course participants to integrate inclusive and representative thinking as a natural element of their regular collecting practices. And so it's very true that we have an awful lot of remedial, well, most of us anyways, have a lot of remedial work to do in our collections that require care and attention and time. But in my ideal world, sort of going forward with our day-to-day practices, inclusivity shouldn't be an afterthought, and it shouldn't necessarily be special or separated or somehow different from our regular day-to-day and the way we normally approach collection development. So that's the setup. And I apologize for all the text on these slides. I'll be reading them. These are excerpts from the assignments. So the first week 1 assignment, draft a plan that describes what you'll do during your first 100 days on the job, so that by the 101st day, you'll have a solid understanding of what you need to collect. And by itself, that's not really interesting. It sort of sounds like out of the can interview question that you'd see on your interview day. But what I think this hinged on, and what I was really focusing on, is that their response had to reflect that they actually watched and understood and thought about the lecture for that week. And so in the lecture, I talked about the usual collection development tools and resources and ways of doing for music. And then I shifted it to this part, which I realize is a lot of words again. And after I move these Zoom controls out of the way, I'll read it to you all. Here we go. The focus of traditional collection development practices, as well as most of the tools we have available to us, are focused on the needs, habits, and worldviews of the most active library users, even though we know, as Coby was noting earlier, we know there's a large part of the population who is not utilizing the collections. Now, possibly people simply have no need or interest in using the library, and that's fine, but equally possible is that the library holds nothing for them. The library has nothing that meets their unique information needs and worldviews, and that the library has nothing that not only discusses their community, but is created by members of their community. And I find that again in my own work, just thinking of it that way, of who am I not including because we don't see them in our library. And I think it provided some really good conversation for the people participating in the course. So that was the week 1 assignment. Let's see if I can move on to week 2. I had them do a review of reviews. So earlier in the week, I had given them a list of very typical resources we go to find reviews of new albums, new scores, new scholarship, etc. And I told them for this assignment, select one of those resources and write a review. Your review does not have to be long, but it should seek to answer the following questions. And specific to this conversation today, the very first 2 questions I had them focus on were these. Do the reviews largely avoid personal convictions in their assessment? And in hindsight, I should have said bias instead of convictions. If I have the opportunity to do this again, I will note that out. So do the reviews avoid personal bias in their assessment? The second question was, does the resource have substantive, I can't say that word, substantive gender and racial balance in terms of content being reviewed, as well as reviewer authorship? And I am going to know, even for me, I was taken by surprise at looking at some of these really solid resources that I have a lot of respect and put a lot of weight in for as resource reviews. I was a little bit surprised about the authorship there, and that led me to think about, and the other people in this group, in this course, to think about the implications of reviewer authorship in terms of what is included for review and what might be excluded for review. And I continue to think about that today as I'm reading through reviews. Let me again move forward to week 3 assignment. This one sort of speaks for itself, and once again, that we remove these controls. Please reflect upon how an approval plan might support or undermine your efforts to build a diverse, equitable, and inclusive collection, as well as steps that could be taken to ensure the plan supports your DEI claims. This is something that we are struggling with at my own institution. I'm struggling with personally, but at this point, we're aware that there are problems, but we haven't quite figured out how to correct them, especially in our Coby approval plans. But I think that awareness makes it possible for us and for me to find alternative ways, a little bit more hands-on, but it works. We're working on it. And then the final assignment, and for me, the last sort of thought exercise. Select a music e-resource, and like an expensive one, like a database, and pitch it as a resource to purchase. In this case, your audience will be a selection committee of 1, which of course, because that was me. And I asked them to consider several questions. They should include several things in their pitch. And again, germane to today's conversation, there are 2 bullets. The 4th one, how well does it meet accessibility needs? And the second one, is the content representative, i.e. does it meet the basics of DEI concepts? And if not, why is this resource still worth pursuing? And I think it's this last question of really trying to prod ourselves into reassessing and coming to a new understanding of what value is in our information resources, that for me at least is interesting, and is sort of helping me reframe the work I do and how I approach scholarship and knowledge making. So that was the last of my 4 thought exercises that I continue to do today. And I think you'll notice, obviously, that there's nothing specific to focus on LGBTQ+. However, just having these conversations, as I did with this group of course participants, it sort of came up organically, and it led us to think an awful lot of how easy it is to think about, especially in our current social, cultural, and political environment, how easy it was for us to focus on one aspect of inclusion, and also acknowledge that it's not just one thing, it's all the things. There are a lot of intersectionalities along the way. And so we need to find ways. And I'm just really amazed and so looking forward to digging into all of the resources that have already been shared this afternoon, because I know I can learn so much just from looking at those to help build up my resources to go to help identify LGBTQ+. We also, I can also throw that in the chat as well. We also created this thing. Let me share this thing properly. Favorite performers and ensembles for discovering new composers and performers. I think this is open, so anybody can edit it if you guys have, I know there's a lot of things that are missing. So if you all see something in there that is missing or that you like to explore, I hope it's useful to you all. I'm gonna stop my share now and leave it there. Thanks you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And okay, I wish we had more time right now because I'm sure a lot of people have some great questions. So I'll remind everybody to use the Q&A if you can, or the chat. We keep using the chat because the panelists are the ones who keep asking questions, and Q&A is not available to panelists. So, but yes, you do make me wish that I had taken your class, because I think that's a really great way into this material and just a great way to create reflective practice for a lot of things. So thank you also to all of our other first half panelists. So to Jaimi and Coby, Matthew and Adam and Christopher for what you're sharing. And I'm hoping we can kind of continue some of these conversations in the chat. But right now we have a brief intermission we've got a little presentation going on there. We'll be back in about 10 minutes with the second half of our program focused more on music professionals. So everybody, please stick around, or if you take a break, please be sure you're back here in about 10 minutes so that you can join in the conversation. Thank you, everybody.
someday you'll join us.